Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today from around Australia. I'm Heidi Kenyon, Programs Officer at Guildhouse, and I welcome you all to the summer edition of the reVision Speaker Series. I think some of you joined us earlier today for the sort of lunchtime session with Erin Coates and Lee Rock, which was fantastic. So this series of conversations is aimed at increasing connectivity within the arts during this time of disconnect, to offer an opportunity for artists to increase their well-being and find new models of sustainability for their practice. Resilience, adaptability and well-being through the lens of arts practice is at the heart of the summer sessions. Speakers and participants will discuss their practice and community, acknowledging the hardships this year in particular has thrown our way, but also the new ways in which we can come together and build our resilience. Guildhouse has received support from the Australia Council Adapt Fund for the reVision program, in addition to support from the Day Family Foundation and Creative Partnerships Australia, for which we're very grateful. I'm speaking with you today from Kaurna land in South Australia, and I pay my respects to the traditional elders of this land, past, present and emerging, and I acknowledge the rich and ongoing creative culture of the Aboriginal people. And we welcome you in the chat box to let us know where you're joining us from today as well. So yeah, please feel free to do that. And you can also put a little link to some social media about your practice if you'd like. So getting into the fun stuff. So today I'll be talking to social media strategist Kacy Ratta, and before we begin, I'll quickly go through some housekeeping. So you can ask questions at any time in the chat box, and we'll address them mostly after the presentation during the Q&A, unless there's something that, if there's something that you need clarified during the session, we'll check in with that as we go, but otherwise we'll hold questions to the end. So you can post your question, or you can write, "I'd like to ask a question," with your mic on, and then we'll come to you afterwards. Aside from that, if you can please keep yourself muted with your mic turned off, as incidental background noise can easily filter through. So yeah, as I said, please feel free to use the chat box now to say hello and post a link to your practice and tell us where you're joining us from. So Kacy, wonderful Kacy Ratta, is an experienced leader and expert at working with teams, clients and agencies to deliver KPI-breaking campaigns for internationally recognised organisations and events across a range of industries, including festivals, events and higher education. So she's currently the Manager of Marketing and Digital Communications at Illuminate Adelaide, which is a new annual winter event with light art installations, immersive technology, music performance and discussion. Kacy is also one of our inaugural Tech Mentors, so some of you are already involved in our Tech Mentor program. But for those of you who are unfamiliar, you can learn more about this program by getting in touch with me or heading to the reVision section of the Guildhouse website. So I will pass over to Kacy now, who will run through the session. And if you've put forward a question through Eventbrite, I'll post those at the end as well.
All right, awesome. Thanks for that, Heidi. And hello, everyone. It's so lovely to see so many faces here on a Tuesday night. I'm just going to flick over to share my screen. And I might get Heidi, you to just confirm that you can see that all fine.
That's great, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Heidi. So just a bit of housekeeping before I jump in. While we will have some time for a Q&A at the end, I'm also quite happy to keep this fairly casual. So if you do have any questions about any topics that I'm chatting to in the moment, feel free to jump in and ask the question at that point in time. I can't actually see the chat box, Heidi, so if anything comes up, I might get you to just sing out and let me know that there's something there. Before we jump into tonight, Heidi just did a very lovely introduction, but just as a little bit of a hi from myself. So as Heidi said, I'm an arts marketer. I specialise in digital and social media marketing. So my background is at Adelaide Fringe, Edinburgh Fringe, and also Adelaide Festival Centre. And I've worked across campaigns and with artists from you know, really tiny local theatre troupes right up to your Disneys of the world. I am currently at Illuminate Adelaide, but outside of my day job, I absolutely love and I'm really passionate about making digital, but also social media marketing accessible to small businesses and also artists, just because I think it is such a great leveler in the fact that it is so accessible and can actually make such a big impact on what you do. But to jump into tonight, so there are three main topics that I'm going to try and plow through. So the first is what is the purpose of social media? So why be involved in organic social media? So unpaid social media. The second is to take you guys through kind of the 4 key overarching steps that I would really recommend in terms of defining your social media strategy. So this is quite high level and it's something that you can engage in whether you've already got an established social media presence and you kind of just want to refresh what you're doing, or whether you're starting from scratch. And they're all steps that by kind of following that process, you're likely to increase your engagement and become a little bit more effective with what you're doing. The third thing that I want to take you through is that I do want to make sure you guys have a lot of really actionable tips to take away from tonight. A lot of really easy things that you can do to make an impact in quite a short period of time. So we're essentially going to go through and hack your content, and I'm going to give you kind of a bunch of rapid fire tips that you can implement quite easily to make a bit of a difference. And then we do have that dedicated time for Q&A at the end as well to cover off absolutely anything else that I don't go through. But so to start with that first topic, what is the purpose of social media? So what is the purpose of organic social media, which is unpaid social media? So any social media you're doing that's not advertising. As a brand, which you all are in your own right as an artist, you are a personal brand. Why have that presence? And the answer is connection and engagement. So social media, particularly organic social media, is all about building connections with an audience and engaging with them in some way. Something that organic social media isn't great for is direct selling, so direct sales. While that's obviously applicable in like an e-commerce capacity, is also applicable when it comes to thinking about art. So it's not to say that you obviously can't sell yourself or sell your works, but it's about going about it in a slightly different way. And so the brands, whether in the arts industry or not, that do really well on social are the ones that understand this and that work on offering value to their audiences. And that value can be very different things. Some brands entertain people on social media. Some brands teach people things. Some brands just offer really beautiful content. But the brands that do really poorly are the brands, and I'm sure you guys can all think of these, are the ones that just post really boring pictures of their products with the messaging of buy this thing. So with that in mind, let's jump into defining your social media strategy. So there are 4 key steps when it comes to kind of that overarching approach. So the first is deciding where to dedicate your time. The second is defining your content strategy. The third is tracking and refining that content strategy. And then the fourth is amplifying with a little bit of paid promotion. That last one can sound a little bit daunting and potentially expensive, but I promise that it's not. And it can actually be a really, really simple, useful, and potentially low-cost tool to really amplify kind of your promotion of yourself and your work. So looking at that first tip, where to dedicate your time. So I absolutely recognize that for everyone on this call, social media is not your day job. You don't have all day to actually dedicate to this. So my recommendation would be to pick one social media channel and absolutely focus your attentions on growing that one and on creating content specifically for that. The reason being is that if you were to try and spread yourself thin, you're very likely to not actually get that much growth or engagement as opposed to just focusing in on that one channel to really nail. I can see a few little notifications popping up. Are there questions coming through, Heidi?
Sorry, I'll just unmute myself. No, it's just that someone was asking about words being cut off, so I'm just suggesting that people can either exit the full screen view or move the little strip of people so that they can see.
Okay. No worries.
So if anyone else has that same issue, if you just hop into the chat text, you'll see the advice around that. But yeah, I'll let you know if there are questions. I'm keeping an eye on that.
Thanks, Patty. So yeah, really thinking about a single channel for you guys to absolutely focus in on and nail. In terms of visual arts, there are 4 kind of main accounts that I would recommend, with the 2 on the left, Instagram and TikTok being the primary 2. And of those 2, if you're kind of not really sure where to go or where to focus your attention, my recommendation would be to focus on Instagram. The reason being is that it is quite a multimodal platform. It has kind of tacked on features of TikTok, of Facebook, of YouTube, in the fact that you've got stories, you've got reels, you've got IGTV, but you've also got the feed to focus on. So this means that you can diversify and play around with different types of content, but you're also keeping your audience growth within that one platform so that you build a really big and strong audience. Instagram's also great because it's obviously very highly visual, which is super important to everyone here. And it's also quite discoverable. So because of the way that Instagram works with hashtags, it is easy to find content, and it is easy to kind of get in the faces of the people that you want seeing what you're posting. And it is also quite easy to find those people within a specific geographic location. So if you do just want to focus on local audiences, that is also quite easy to do. I do want to suggest though, if you are kind of maybe a little bit more adventurous or you want to do something different, TikTok is actually a really, really, really great opportunity for visual artists, particularly at the moment, because it is still an emerging platform, and because of the way that the platform's built, it is actually quite easy to grow a really big audience in a short period of time if your content is good. Obviously, it's a very different platform in the way that it is all video content, it's all very short form content. So you'd need to have a think about how that fits for you and what you could do to leverage it. So I'd recommend hopping on and having a look at what other visual artists are doing in that space. The other thing to consider is that audiences on there are obviously a lot younger. You do have a lot of younger millennials and Gen Z on the platform. So obviously thinking about whether that's appropriate for your work and your brand and what you're trying to achieve. But there is actually great opportunity to be had there as well. But so once you've picked that single platform to really focus your attention on, the next thing that you need to do is to focus on defining your content strategy. So what is it that you are actually going to be posting? What is it that you're going to be talking to your audiences about? That is going to be different for every single person on this call, but there are 3 things that will be the same, and that absolutely have to be the same in order to be effective. So that's consistency, authenticity, and knowing your audience. And the biggest one of these 3, and the one that I often see people get wrong, is consistency. I find that most people are pretty good at being authentic, particularly artists when I work with them. And you also have, I feel, quite a strong sense of your audience. But consistency is the one that I feel like a lot of brands and particularly a lot of small businesses get wrong. So the reason that this is so important is that all social media platforms are built on algorithms. They're kind of pesky, kind of annoying, and we don't have time to dive right into them tonight. But the consistency of your content, so the quality of what you're posting, how often you're posting, and when you're posting, is one of the factors that will help the algorithm determine how many people actually see what you're posting. And obviously without anyone seeing the content that you're posting, it's very hard for people to engage with it, and it's very hard for you to get new followers. So one of the biggest mistakes that I do see a lot of small businesses make is that you might have a small period of free time where you can create a bunch of content really quickly and post like 27 things in 3 days. But then for the next 3 weeks, you might only post 1 thing. That is a really surefire way to essentially damage your account. So what you want to do when you are in that position of having time to create content is to create it and then plan it out. It could just be literally a little calendar in your diary. It could be a Google sheet where you just go and map out where you're actually posting. Keep it consistent, and be honest with yourself. If you think that you can post once a week, you're better off doing that consistently than 16 times one week and 3 times the next. Another thing that I also really like visual artists to think about when they're tackling their social media is how much of yourself do you actually want to put on display? So how much of yourself is your brand versus how much of your art is your brand? And the reason being is that this will kind of dictate if your social media accounts are more of a blog or a vlog for yourself and your art, or whether your account is purely for the art itself. And the reason this is important is that it will dictate the vibe of your account, and it'll also dictate the kind of followers and the kind of follower growth that you get. Neither option is the wrong option, but what you want to do is pick kind of one method of content and stick to it. What you'll do if you decide on one option or the other and then kind of, I guess, flip between them, your followers will start getting quite confused, and you will actually kind of see follower growth drop, and you may start losing people. So I want to give you guys 2 examples to go away and have a look at later in order to kind of illustrate what I'm explaining here. So these are 2 Instagram accounts of artists that I absolutely love. So these are Amanda Oleander and Katana Comics. So Amanda really embodies the idea of a social account that is much more of a mix of her art as well as a personal account. Her feed is very much her art, but if you have a look at her stories, she's quite organic. She's always jumping on there, and she uses them as a personal blog. Whereas Katana Comics, the account is very much focused on the art. Despite the fact that the art is quite personable, it is the pure focus. Like I said, neither of these are wrong, but you want to pick one way of being and stick to it in order to grow and continue to grow your audiences. So we've now picked our account of focus. We've got a content strategy in place. The next thing that you will need to do is to continue to track what's working and refine based on that. So as much as I've just told you to think about what content you want to consistently be posting, it's also important you think about and have a look at what's actually working and what your audiences are engaging with. So what I want to do is focus on what's actually an important metric for you guys to track and what's not so important, because I can assure you that if you go into Google and try to Google how to see what's working on social media, you will start getting quite overwhelmed quite quickly, and you'll see a lot of conflicting advice as well. My recommendation for you is that the things that you want to focus on that will tell you that you're doing well with your content are what we call engagement metrics. So your likes, your shares, your comments, and your video views. Those last 3 are actually even more important because, again, those pesky algorithms weight them more highly, but they're all very important. The things that I want you guys to not worry about when you're initially starting to grow your social media accounts are reach and impressions. So these are both stats that essentially refer to how many people have seen something that you've posted. Reach refers to the amount of people. Impressions is the amount of times. The reason that you don't want to focus on those is that if you purely focus on how many times your content is being seen, you will actually reach a peak where your growth is going to plateau. You won't have more people seeing your content, and you won't have more people following you either. If you kind of flip that and focus on engagement over how many people are seeing your content, those views will naturally increase for you, and you'll also find that your followers will naturally increase. So that's kind of why I would say don't get bogged down in how many people are viewing your content. Also, don't get bogged down in how many people are actually even following your account. If you can make that engagement strong, everything else will naturally follow for you. And so the final kind of piece of that strategy and how I would approach social media if you're planning for it is to kind of, once you've gone through that process of having an account, having a content strategy, and then knowing what works, is to consider amplifying it through some paid promotion on social media. Again, this can sound kind of potentially expensive and kind of confusing and hard to do. But the unfortunate reality is that social media, particularly for brands, which, as I said, you guys all are in your own way, is very much pay to play. It's not to say you can't succeed without it, but is a really good way to kind of, I guess, beat your competition. And if you do want to promote something specific, say an exhibition or an event you've got coming up, this is a really, really good way to do so. Budgets can be quite small for this. even something like $50, say if you've got an event, can actually make quite a big difference in the amount of people that are going to engage with what you're talking about. The reason that I leave this step to last and why you don't want to do it first up is that if you kind of run into this blind and don't understand what your audiences already engage with and what content that you're posting without any money behind it is already working, you're going to end up spending a lot more money than if you already know what works and you're just kind of topping it up with that little bit of extra cash just to give yourself a little bit of an extra foot in the door, step ahead on these platforms. I obviously don't have time to teach you guys how to do this tonight, but what I can do is point you in the direction of some really great resources. Like most things, YouTube is a really good place to go, but I also want to point to LinkedIn Learning. And the reason I'm doing this is because it is technically a paid resource. So the kind of how-tos in there are quite curated and very high quality. But if you do have an Adelaide City Library card, so any of the libraries in the state, you can actually access it for free. And that's a really, really great resource to learn how to boost a post or run a small ad campaign, or also learn about organic social media in general. So I would definitely recommend checking that out. So that's kind of my general approach to mapping out a social media strategy. So what I want to do now is kind of flip the switch and we're going to look at how to hack your content. So what I mean by this is essentially a lot of very small and actionable tips that you can implement on your current content. So whatever you might be posting, they're all quite small changes, but the more of these that you can do, they'll have a compound effect and they will all increase your engagement, increase your reach, increase your effectiveness, and hopefully increase your followers as well. So the first is to consider creating vertical content. So vertical content for Facebook and Instagram. This is obviously a given somewhere like TikTok. Square is good, but vertical is better. And obviously your traditional landscape should be your least preferred option. So there are a couple of reasons why. So the main reason that you want to be creating vertical content is that, again, to come back to those pesky algorithms, they actually prefer it. So Facebook and Instagram prefer when people post vertical content, to the point where if you're running a paid campaign, it actually costs you less money to place an ad that's vertical than it does to place one that's landscape. The second reason is thinking about your audiences. So it's much more enjoyable to consume content on a mobile device that is vertical or at the least square. Most users of social media are on mobile, so you want to cater to that. If you've posted a video, if I have to flip my phone around in order to watch that landscape video at full size, that's an extra barrier for me to consider watching what you've just posted. The third reason is that, again, if you're looking at those examples on the screen of the different sizes on the mobile phones, the vertical takes up more space. And so if you're competing for audience's attention when you're posting content and then mindlessly scrolling through social media, that vertical size has almost 3 times the chance of being seen than the landscape size, just purely by the fact that you're going to be on their screen for a longer amount of time. So again, this is a fairly small tweak you can make when you're creating your content that will have kind of that compound impact the more and more that you can do this. I will just say quickly though, as a caveat, so you can also create full screen images. So you will see that I've put a 4:5 ratio here. You can definitely do that as well. But again, coming back to the fact that you guys probably don't have all day to spend on social, there are certain placements where that full screen vertical would actually get cut off. So I do recommend aiming for this 4:5 ratio, just so it means that your content is seen in full, absolutely everywhere that it can. So the next quick tip is to start videos with a bang. This is quite obvious, but it's one that I always find when I work with small businesses, they don't really consider until we talk about it. Most people on social media only actually watch 10 seconds of a video. If you're getting people watching your videos for longer than that, you're doing something absolutely incredible, and I would love to hear what it is. But essentially, if you want to promote an exhibition in your video, if you've got some really amazing information that you want to convey, put it in the first 10 seconds, or else it's very likely that people won't actually hear about it. And by the same token, if you've got an amazing hook that's going to make people want to watch the video, put it in the first 10 seconds or put it in the first 3 seconds so that you've given your audiences a chance to hear that hook and continue to watch on. The next one is good old captioning of videos. This is always a favorite one when I bring it up. But essentially, 85% of people watch videos on social media with their sound off. So obviously exceptions are things like Instagram stories and reels. TikTok obviously is another exception. But generally, if you're posting a video to Instagram or to Facebook without captions, you're automatically saying that you don't want 85% of your followers to watch it. You're essentially saying that you don't want 85% of, say, Facebook users to watch it, which if you've gone to the trouble of putting that video together, you've spent the time on creating that video, that extra step of actually putting captions on it will give you, will essentially give you back that 85% of people. So I'm not going to point you to a single resource for doing this because it really does depend on what platform you're using to create your videos, whether you're on an iPhone or an Android, or if you're using a computer to edit. But a quick Google will give you a really good place to start. If you're super stuck, just learn how to caption videos natively in Facebook. Can make a really big difference as well. The next tip is evergreen content. So this is all about working smarter and not harder. So again, I have no doubt that you guys are all absolutely pressed for time. So when you're going away and thinking about the sort of content that you're creating, I want you guys to think about content that you can create and post now, but content that you can post again in 6 months' time and it'll still be on brand and relevant. And this is something you can consider in your forward planning, but you can also consider in terms of creating a bit of a content library for you. So something that I'd recommend that you guys all do after this is to go back across all of your posts for the last 12 months, find the top 10 performing posts, and if they're still on brand for you and they're still relevant, create an Excel spreadsheet and just pop them all in there. And then you've got 10 weeks worth of content. You can post one of those a week. It's a really quick way to up your engagement without spending a lot of extra time creating content. And by having that really high engagement content kind of peppered throughout your account, it'll mean that when you then post something else in that space of time, your audiences are going to be more likely to see what you're posting. The final tip is kind of taken from the world of social media influencers, and that's to employ a bit of a posse or what's known as a social pod. And this is to work to kind of warm up the algorithms in a sense. So before I talk you through how you're going to do this, I'm just going to explain a little bit about how engagement impacts the algorithm and impacts how people see your content. Obviously, this is just one factor that works within Facebook and Instagram's algorithms. But if you're talking about engagement, what happens when you post a piece of content is that these platforms will show it to a really small number of people that already follow you. If those people don't do anything with it, if they don't like it, if they don't share it, the social platforms stop showing that content pretty quickly. If those people do engage with it though, it'll go, okay, this might be a good piece of content. So we'll show it to a slightly larger group of people that already follow you. Again, if they don't engage with it, that's when you'll see that content drop out of news feeds. But if those people continue to engage with it, the platforms know that this is a piece of content that is keeping people on their platforms for longer periods of time, which is exactly what they want. So what it does is it starts showing that piece of content to more of your followers, and it also shows it to people that don't follow you. So that's the point you always want to get to, because that's where your growth is going to be. That's where you're going to find new people. So what you want to do to try and increase your engagement at that first step is to have a small kind of group of people that you can rely on to pretty consistently interact with your content, and people that you can call on to interact kind of just as you posted it. So it could be a small group of friends, it could be some of your family, it could be a small group of other artists that you kind of have a bit of an understanding with. And when you post a piece of really important content, send it to them and be like, hey, you know, could you like this? Could you share this? Don't do it with every single post because you might get shadow banned that way, but do it with just anything super important, say like 1 in 5 posts. just the more engagement you can get at that kind of initial time of posting, the more likely you are to actually have that piece of content engaged with. And so that brings me to the end of those content tips. So I am now going to turn it over to you guys, kind of with any questions on either anything we've spoken about tonight, or if you guys have any additional questions about basically anything social related.
Thanks so much, Kacy. I know that I have definitely gleaned quite a lot of tips. So yeah, Julianne has just written a little note again for people to post questions in the comments, but I can go through some of the ones from Eventbrite, which I think a lot of bits you have covered already. Whoops. Oh, now it's just posted in. So the first comment that we had in Eventbrite was from Michelle, who was asking about social media tailored for artists in particular, which I think is something that you've already gone through. But if there's something else that you want to know, Michelle, please feel free to add to that.
Just see a question from Rita that we might jump to first, and then we come back to those. So Rita's just asked, you have a view on whether it's better to focus on self or combo or just your art? And that's a really good question. The answer is, unfortunately, there isn't a best answer for everyone. I think if you're the sort of person that's comfortable putting yourself out there in that kind of vlog style, that is a really good approach, just in the way that, again, social media comes down to connection and engagement, and it's much easier to do that if you are putting yourself out there as another human being. But if you're not comfortable doing that, and that's not going to really be authentic to you, that's actually probably not a very good approach, because it will potentially come off as, I don't want to say a little fake, but it might not be quite as genuine. So yeah, the answer is, if you can, I think putting yourself out there is great, but if you're not comfortable doing that, there's absolutely no problem with it just being about your art. So Michelle Lee, what are one of the top call to actions you suggest for more engagement? So that's a really good question and a really interesting one. So in terms of putting call to actions within the copy of your posts, there is actually something known as engagement baiting, and it's actually something that Facebook and Instagram don't like. So if you're thinking about putting, say, a post up with comment with your favorite XYZ, or comment with this, or tell me more about this, it can actually hurt the performance of a post, because all of those platforms can actually read what you're posting, and they may penalize that. So in terms of a call to action, I really recommend trying to phrase it in a way that it doesn't come across as a direct call to action. So tell me about is a better way to say comment with, because again, the algorithms don't penalize it so hard. Otherwise, it really depends on your audiences. I would say to just test a couple and see what resonates with them. So from Ellen, does it work to do art focused content in your feed, but then do self focus in your stories or as reels? Yeah, 100%. So that example I gave of Amanda Oleander, that's very much her approach. That's not to say you have to do that, but that's one of the really great things about Instagram, is that you can have different types of content in those different spots. Stories work really well when they are really organic, whereas that grid, you might want to make that more curated, and reels again can kind of just be a little bit of whatever you want. Everyone's still kind of figuring out exactly what reels are for, so you can afford to have a little bit more fun there. And obviously hopping on trends is a really good way to also be seen there. So if there is, say, a reels trend that you see that you feel like you could jump on in an authentic way, absolutely do.
So Kacy, I'm just scrolling up a little bit higher to some of the questions at the start. So Jane has asked, you mentioned a good time to post. Is that a thing?
Yes, there is. So again, this is going to, and I sound like a broken record, it will always come back to your audience and what your audience is more likely to engage with. But in terms of like a general rule of thumb, Saturdays are a really good day to post. Sundays are a really terrible day to post. Anything from about 6 p.m. to about 8 p.m. local time on a weeknight is a really good time to post, as is about, say, 12 p.m. to about 2 p.m. On a weekday. You'll find that most people at work are off checking their social media by that time. And also on a weekday, the morning commute time. So from about 7 a.m. To just after 9 is another really good time to post. But again, I mean, try that as a general rule of thumb. But then have a look at what's actually performing. If you're finding that you're posting on a Sunday and your audiences are super engaged, then by all means disregard everything I've just said and post then.
Awesome. And Sarah has just asked if you could talk to us a little bit more about hashtags, and I think someone else has asked, Alice has also asked for some advice on using hashtags.
Cool. So in terms of hashtags, first of all, you don't want to use too many. If you use over about 15, you might start running into, just talking about Instagram here, but you might run into being shadow banned. And shadow banning happens if you're using hashtags that are irrelevant to you. So if you're just putting any old hashtag on there for the sake of putting it on there, it's not going to be effective. In terms of kind of hashtag research, I think the best thing to do is to have a look at a couple of other accounts that you think your audience is probably aligned to, who you think your content might align to, and have a look at what hashtags they're using. I do also recommend, if you want to focus on local audiences, putting in those really basic like Adelaide, South Australia hashtags, or wherever you guys are based, are also quite useful because it means that you will pop up when people are looking for those, and you will also be shown in the recommended section for those as well.
Can you explain what shadow banning means?
Of course. So shadow banning essentially means where, and this can happen on any social platform, but the official term comes from Instagram, essentially means that the social media platform doesn't quite ban your account, but it doesn't like what you're doing in a way that it'll just stop showing your content to people. And it makes it quite hard for people to find your account. It doesn't always last for a super long period of time, but the sorts of things that will get you there, it's very hard to do, so I wouldn't stress about it. But using a ridiculous amount of hashtags is the number one thing I find that most people get shadow banned for.
Thanks, Kacy.
No worries.
Let me just flick through. Rita had a few questions which I think you've covered in some of the other bits already, but
I can see, so Kelly has asked if there are any resources for more information on Instagram algorithms. Again, a quick Google will show you a lot of different resources in terms of finding ones that are, I guess, reputable and really easy to digest. I really love anything that comes from Buffer. So Buffer, a really, really great resource for kind of easy to consume social media information, and Hootsuite as well. So if you're kind of typing into Google Buffer social media algorithm resources, you should be able to find a few really good things. The other thing to know is that they change quite quickly. So they're obviously a good thing to learn about, and to learn about in a really high level, but also don't get too bogged down in the absolute nitty gritty. Just always know that essentially engagement is always going to win the game. And so from Valerie, what does a hashtag do? So it depends on the platform, but that's a really excellent question. So hashtags are essentially, think of them as like little search buttons or beacons. So by placing a hashtag on your content with a specific word, it tells the platform what your content is about. And depending on the platform, that may then do different things in different ways. So for instance, on Instagram, which is really where they're most effective, I'm just going to use the example of hashtag cake because I really like cake. If I put that hashtag on a photo of a piece of cake I just posted, if anyone's looking at the specific feed of hashtag cake photos, my photo will appear in there. If I have liked a whole lot of photos of cakes with that hashtag, Instagram will also start recommending photos to me with that hashtag. So again, if you want people to see your image that might be liking that content already, it means that it's more likely to be shown to them. On different platforms, on TikTok, it works in quite a similar way. Facebook hashtags are not all that effective, so I wouldn't really worry about them. And on Twitter, again, they kind of work in a similar way, but they also help people define trending topics. But I probably wouldn't focus on that as a visual artist. So any tips for captions from Meg? Probably my initial tip would just be that if you need a really easy way to learn how to do hashtags and kind of a way that you don't need to learn any new technology or platforms, is to learn how to caption in either Facebook or YouTube. Both of them have native captioning capabilities. They can also auto-generate a lot of captions that you definitely have to go in and edit because they're not all accurate, but they're getting pretty good. They're probably about like 80% accurate. So that'll save you some time, and it'll also mean that you can just do that natively within the platform as opposed to having to learn something else. You can also get a lot of really good apps that will actually caption your Instagram stories as you record them, which is quite cool as well. I haven't found a free one that's super great, but do a little bit of research and diving into that as well. If you're someone that uses stories a lot or uses kind of stories to record stuff and then post them elsewhere, that's another really good way to go. So a question from Ellen, should you aim for hashtags that have a lower use amount? What's a good rough number to aim for? In terms of the number of, I guess, posts on a hashtag, you want to probably aim for a good mix. And the reason is that if you're using a hashtag that is used by a small amount of people, that's obviously great because it means your content is more likely to be shown to that small group of people, but you're also gonna have kind of that wider engagement with I guess larger communities. So in terms of a rough number, I would probably say to aim for 5 that are quite, I guess, bespoke. So that could be a location-based hashtag, a very specific hashtag to, you know, whatever you're creating, and then maybe 5 more general ones to round that out to about 10. Have I missed any others, Heidi?
I'm just combing through. It's much more difficult to do this than it is to walk around a room with a mic. And yeah, please, if anyone who's watching and has already posted something that we have missed, feel free to just make another note in the chat box again now. Caption
feed images.
Yeah. You go.
Could you just clarify, Sarah, in what way you mean? So, I mean, in terms of captioning the images that you post to your feed, again, that's going to be very dependent on your content and your audiences. A couple very general rules to go by, particularly for something like Instagram, is that fewer words is generally better. So people are more likely to engage with content that has a shorter caption. That's not to say people aren't reading longer captions, but what you'll find is that people will spend so much time reading it that they won't actually engage with the content. So that can definitely be good, and I'm not saying not to, but do test both of those and see what works for you. But other than that, the actual content of your captions, I think, really comes down to you understanding who you are as an artist and who your audiences are. And it might take you a little while to kind of craft that tone of voice and really refine it. So jumping to Rita, who sees stories and how? So in terms of Instagram stories, your followers will see them. Instagram stories don't really provide like recommended stories in the same way that you do in a feed. Stories are both time-based and based on how often you happen to engage with a person. So I'll see my closest friends' stories first if I always watch them. Stories are really good though. I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but the last time I did one of these presentations, it was like 70% of Instagram users will go into the app and watch stories, but not actually view any of the content in the feed. So definitely do think about using stories, because you're probably more likely to be seen there than you actually are in the feed. So to answer Michelle's question, what amount is considered a smaller following for hashtags under 10K? I think anything under 5K, I would personally consider like a small hashtag. You can get like very, very bespoke tags that might have like 100 posts. But I think anything under about 5 is probably relevant in terms of a small number. So what's your view on Instagram and Facebook shops for selling online? They're super useful. They're really, really useful if you can do them well. I will say that for visual artists, it's probably a little bit different in terms of the fact that you may not be running an e-commerce store, or you might be. I'm also not sure what each of you guys individually are doing. But again, they can be quite useful. Instagram has actually just updated their online shop functionality and actually made it a little bit harder for people to use. And there's been a lot of kind of negative discussion around that. So if you're thinking of getting into that space, I'd maybe hold off a month or two, because I think everyone's hoping Instagram will roll back to the old version of Instagram shopping. But it's definitely useful and definitely something to learn more about if you're interested in. So from Valerie, what platform do I use mainly? I mean, in terms of brand accounts that I've worked for, I've always focused on Instagram and Facebook, only because that does cover a really good cross-section of kind of demographics. And particularly for somewhere like Adelaide, that's where you're going to find most people. In terms of me personally, I'm a massive TikTok fan, so that's where you will find me kind of in bed at the end of the night just watching Ratta the musical, which if any of you guys are on TikTok, would recommend. So from Ellen, should you go back and cull old posts from your feed to make it more curated, or just be more consistent with future content? I've had my Instagram for a few years, so very early posts don't necessarily match. That's a really excellent question. There's no one way to answer that. I absolutely don't think there's any issue with having older content that's not consistent. If you look at, say, like really big Instagram influencers, if you scroll back long enough, you'll find their really early stuff on there. But at the same time, it won't actually hurt your engagement to hide them. So if you do decide that you want to hide them to make your feed more consistent, that's not going to impact you negatively in any way. So from Bianca, writing about myself, getting past the fear of posting, growing an audience. So getting past the fear of posting, I think, is a really big one, and learning to write about yourself. The only thing I can say there is probably to start small. Maybe start writing about yourself as opposed to jumping on and like vlogging in stories is a really good way to start. In the end, all I can say is that the more you do it, the more comfortable you'll get with it as well. I'm just going to scroll up to see if I've missed any others.
Also, while you're having a look at that, Kacy, if there is anyone that wanted to quickly ask something via their video, please make a little note in the chat box, because we've still got a few more minutes.
What are my views on using Linktree via the bio on Instagram? Linktree is a really, really good source. It's a really good way to add additional links to Instagram bios. So yeah, absolutely no problems with using that. And I've definitely used it for brand accounts before. So it's a really good option.
Awesome. I think it looks to me like we've covered, there's been lots of questions for this session, which has been fantastic.
Wow, Great. We've got one last little question. Two good questions. I'll answer Valerie's first. What is Linktree? So if any of you guys don't know what Michelle is referring to, Linktree is, it's actually a website that you can use and go to, and you can generate, I guess, a link in your Instagram bio that has several links in it so that you're not restricted to just putting that single link in your bio. So you've probably seen and used these before. There's a couple of different versions of them. So Linktree is just one of them. And so just to answer these last two. So Ellen, have you got any advice on image descriptions? I can't teach you how to write an image description over video chat, but I do think they're extremely important. So do definitely spend some time learning how to use those. So for anyone that's not familiar, an image description is what is displayed if someone is using a screen reader or another sort of accessibility device to access social media. On Instagram, you can put them natively in the photo, or a lot of people put them in the comments, and on other platforms, you put them in as you post the photo. So my advice is just to really learn how to do it if you do have the time and the capability to. So watermarks on photos. If this is in relation to your own artwork and wanting to kind of make sure you've got a watermark on them so no one else can use them, I recommend trying to put it somewhere small, like in a corner or something like that. I know that's not as effective, but having a watermark over your image when you post it is also not going to get great engagement. If this is in terms of using like stock imagery online with watermarks, definitely recommend staying away from it. When I see on Instagram about promote this post and charge them code for that. So this is a question about whether you want to promote a post if Instagram's recommending that you do. I absolutely don't think you should be doing this. If you do want to put some money into advertising posts or putting money behind and boosting posts on Facebook or Instagram, do a little bit of learning rather than just clicking that button that Facebook or Instagram will tell you to do, because it's very likely that they're probably not recommending your best content or at the best time, and you might be spending money where you don't need to be. So spend some time to get informed so you can make those informed decisions. And from Sid, should we use a personal account or switch to a business account? If we're talking about Instagram, switching to a business account is great because you'll get a lot of different analytics and stats about your audiences that can be extremely useful to you. So I definitely would recommend it.
Awesome. Fantastic. So I think we might wrap up. There's lots of stuff to digest there, and yeah, super grateful for all those tips and tricks, and you've made, you know, the way that you've laid it out has been really clear, Kacy, which is fantastic because I know it's, you know, a bit of a minefield to get into. So yeah, we're really grateful to have that very clear advice and very specific and easy to implement tips. And a reminder too to everyone that because we have recorded this session, you can go back and look through again. So yeah, thank you all of you so much for joining us today and for putting forward your questions and, you know, watching this and engaging with it. It's been really meaningful to have you here. Julianne has just posted in the chat box a link to the survey. We'd really love to hear from you about how you found this session, as this info greatly informs how our program develops and how we best program for your needs. So as you know, this is our second series, our summer series of revision, and we're sort of responding to feedback from the last session. We'll continue to do that, so please fill out the survey. And we'll email this link through to you as well. So this concludes our first day. So we've got 2 more excellent days coming up. Tomorrow we continue the series with Professor Susan Luckman, Catherine Truman and Kath Inglis, discussing the impact of mentorships on creative practice at 1 p.m. followed by Melbourne artist Mish Grigor discussing the year that has been 2020 at 7 p.m. And on Thursday, Liam Benson and Julia Robinson will be in conversation at 1 p.m. with narrative adornment and metamorphosis. Trish Hanson will discuss well-being within arts practice at 4 p.m. and at 7 p.m. our seasonal session of connections, introducing 4 curators to our community with Andy Butler from West Space, Elspeth Pitt from NGA, Jason Waterhouse from Stockroom, and Rebecca Evans from AGSA. So that's a really fun platform. If you didn't get a chance to do it last season, we recommend that you jump in and try it out. And I'm just checking whether anyone's posted anything else. Some lovely feedback. Will the other sessions be available? So all of our sessions for revision are recorded, Kylie. So after our summer series has concluded in coming weeks, we'll send out links to the videos from the recordings. And thank you all for your feedback, and thanks again, Kacy. It's been really fantastic to have you on board for this, and also in our Tech Mentor program.
Most welcome. Thank you everyone for joining tonight.